Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. When Eddie and Eileen Fradd exchanged their wedding vows on the morning of June 12, 2006, it seemed like they couldn't have asked for a more perfect day. The Kansas couple had planned their wedding to coincide with a bowling tournament that they were attending in Reno, Nevada that week, an event in which many of the wedding guests would also be taking part. For the venue, Eddie and Eileen had chosen a picturesque gazebo spot right beside the Truckee River. The weather was beautiful, the couple were surrounded by friends and family, and the atmosphere was happy and festive. However, just after 11 a.m. that morning, things would take an abrupt turn when the celebrations were interrupted by two loud noises that came in quick succession. Guests would later describe this as a sort of popping sound, followed by something else. These noises were initially assumed to have been made by the best man, who had been preparing to open a bottle of champagne to toast the new couple. Eileen herself would say that she thought that maybe a car had backfired, or someone had set off a firecracker. But when the startled and curious guests turned their attention to the best man, he was still holding the corked bottle of champagne, looking just as confused as everyone else. It didn't sink in that something might be wrong until the sounds of police sirens started to be heard from all directions in the surrounding area. What the Fradds and their wedding guests would soon find out is that the noise that they had heard was actually a gunshot. More specifically, it was the sound of a rifle being fired from the 5th floor of a nearby parking structure, the bullet from which had shattered the 3rd floor window of a judge's office at the Reno Justice Court. Inside that room, 53-year-old family court judge Chuck Weller was now lying on the floor with a bullet wound to his chest, fighting for his life. While the resulting chaos in the area would ruin far more than just the Fradds' wedding that day, what was worse was that the attack on Judge Weller turned out to only be the tip of the iceberg. The perpetrator behind the crime had committed another heinous act of violence that day, but by the time police knew who they were looking for, he was hundreds of miles away. This is the story of Darren Mack, the so-called Father's Day fugitive. Before we get to the main part of today's story, we'd like to ask that if you enjoy our videos, to please remember to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell as well, in order to stay up to date with our latest releases. Okay, with that out of the way, back to the video. When Darren Mack met Charla Samsel in 1994, everyone around them could see that they had an instant connection. At the time, Charla was a 27-year-old nutritional workshop course leader who had once been an aspiring actress. Friends described her as outgoing, attractive, and self-assured. Darren was a wealthy businessman, the half-owner of his family's successful Reno pawn shop, the Palace Jewelry and Loan Company. Charla and Darren instantly bonded over their interest in self-improvement seminars and workshops, and it wasn't long before they became a couple. A year later, they were married. The May 1995 wedding was a lavish ceremony in Lake Tahoe, and appeared to set the tone for what would be a fairy tale marriage. The Macks were young, wealthy, attractive, and in love, and by all accounts, appeared to be on top of the world. Indeed, in the years immediately following their wedding, Darren and Charla would continue to be the envy of their friends and neighbors. They settled down in a $1.6 million, 5,700 square foot home in the Washoe Valley, and Charla began to work alongside her husband at the pawn shop. In 1997, the couple had a daughter together. It was Charla's first child, while Darren had a son and daughter from a previous marriage. While navigating family dynamics in these sorts of situations can often be complicated, it seemed like the Macks figured things out quickly. Charla became a stay-at-home mom, and Darren's son and daughter got along with their new stepmother well enough. Both Charla and Darren were involved in volunteer work at the kids' schools and were familiar faces in local community activities. They traveled, went on expensive vacations, and drove luxury cars, all while appearing to be the perfect family. Emblematic of their happiness during this time was a billboard ad that Charla took out for Father's Day of 1998, which was located not too far from the family pawn shop. It read, "The Mack family presents Darren Mack, 1998 Father/Husband of the Year, a unanimous decision by his wife Charla and his 3 wonderful children. However, Darren and Charla also had another side to their life that they kept hidden from most of their friends and family. The two were in an open marriage and were regulars in the Las Vegas nightlife and swingers scene. Though this was apparently fun and exciting for both of them in the early part of their marriage, in the years following the birth of their daughter in 1997, Charla reportedly started to have second thoughts. She wanted out of the swinger lifestyle and told Darren she longed for a more traditional marriage. Darren, however, was still having a good time and didn't want their fast-paced lifestyle to stop. The disagreement was the first of many cracks that would eventually tear the marriage apart. Though Darren and Charla continued to try and maintain the relationship through the early 2000s, the volatility in their marriage was becoming increasingly obvious to those around them. The two would reportedly scream and yell at each other at work, at home, and even in public places, with one often reducing the other to tears. During one domestic abuse investigation that ultimately went nowhere, police reportedly asked Darren's daughter a routine question about Charla, to which she replied, "She slapped my dad across the face at the airport." When asked why Charla did it, the girl replied, 'Cause they were really mad at each other." By the summer of 2004, the relationship had totally fallen apart. Darren moved out of their palatial home on Franktown Road and began renting a luxury condo in the gated Fleur-de-Lis community just off of Wilbur May Parkway. In February of 2005, Charla filed for divorce. Though things were bitter between the couple now, they would only get uglier from here. Before we get into the specifics of the Mack's divorce, we wanted to offer something of a disclaimer. While all the things we're about to mention were sourced specifically from news articles and reports from the time, there's such a crazy volume of allegations made by both sides in this case that it's nearly impossible for the most part to sort out which claims are definitively true and which are false. That being said, it's worth pointing out that based on our research, it appears that the divorce that Darren Mack went through with his first wife was similarly bitter and drawn out. Though we're not going to jump too far into the specifics since this video is already long enough, there was an extended custody battle over both children that ended with them being split up. Still, for the sake of transparency, we're simply going to do our best to tell you what we read, and you can decide for yourself what you believe. The judge assigned to preside over the Mack's case was a man named Chuck Weller. Weller had been elected to his position just a few months earlier, but had extensive prior experience as a lawyer, specifically working on family court cases. 3 months into the Mack's divorce proceedings, Weller set up a temporary support plan for Charla. He reasoned that since she was not working, and Darren's monthly income was estimated to be $44,000, Darren should pay her $10,000 a month in spousal support, as well as an additional $849 a month for child support. Custody of their daughter was to be shared on a week-on, week-off basis. Darren began to fight the support plan almost immediately, claiming that he didn't have the money. This was despite the fact that only a month earlier he had estimated his net worth to be over $10 million and had used this to secure a $500,000 line of credit with a local bank. By August, Darren had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection and had reportedly paid little of the money Weller had ordered. At the same time, he began to contact local media as well as write about his experience in family court on several local blogs. In order to draw more attention to the case, he enlisted the help of friends and family to repeat these complaints. These tactics were allegedly attempts to discredit Judge Weller. Despite filing for bankruptcy and claiming he had no money, Darren reportedly continued to spend lavishly on himself and new girlfriends he was seeing. On at least 2 occasions, he reportedly took women to luxury resorts in Mexico, where they attended swingers events. At the same time, Charla allegedly struggled to pay her bills, continuing to live in the 5,700 square foot home they had once shared, and taking on thousands of dollars in debt while still not being able to keep up with her expenses. Power and heat to the house were soon cut off. Meanwhile, Darren claimed he was sending Charla money, and that he had the receipts to prove it. He claimed that he just wasn't able to pay the sum that the judge had ordered. In November of that year, things escalated even further, when Darren's mother and business partner, Joan Mack, filed a lawsuit through the pawn shop against Charla, claiming that she hadn't returned a $13,000 Rolex watch and a $190,000 4-carat platinum ring. Joan claimed that the items had merely been loaned to Charla, while Charla claimed that they had been gifts from Darren. According to the reports we read, Darren likely had given Charla the jewelry as gifts, and he was the one that had loaned them out from the pawn shop. According to Charla, this wasn't the first time Darren had given her jewelry, only to try and take it back later. Finally, in early 2006, it looked like Darren and Charla had come to a tentative settlement agreement through their lawyers. They presented the plan to Judge Weller, who laid everything out during a hearing on January 9th. The agreement was that within 2 days of signing, Darren would give Charla $480,000, which she could use to buy a car, a house, and settle her debts. Then, Darren would set up an account to pay Charla $500,000 in equal installments of $10,000 over 5 years. He would also be responsible for expenses like their daughter's orthodontic work, while they would split other costs such as tuition, extracurricular activities, daycare, and health insurance. Another part of the negotiation said that the lawsuit against Charla from the pawn shop would also be dropped. While all of these things were agreed to by Charla and Darren, things started to fall apart once again when they began to discuss the support payments that Darren had already missed, as well as their personal property. Charla claimed that Darren had broken back into their house after moving out and had taken a U-Haul truck worth of stuff while she was out of town. While Darren reportedly agreed to give most of the property back, he didn't want to pay the more than $30,000 worth of spousal support that he was behind on. Another sticking point was the Pawnshop Lawsuit. While Darren Mack had agreed to drop it as part of the negotiation, Charla wanted her to pledge that she also wouldn't turn around and try to sue her for something else once the agreement was signed. Darren Mack reportedly refused these terms and said she wouldn't sign her part of the agreement. After the January hearing, the agreement fell apart. What followed was months more legal fighting between Charla and Darren, during which the couple continued to make dozens of allegations against one another. Charla claimed that she had still not received any money from Darren, while Darren claimed she and her lawyers were lying about the spousal support payments. Charla claimed that Darren had hired a private investigator who had tried to obtain personal information from her by attempting to date her through Match.com. Darren claimed that Charla had sent viruses to his computer, and that she was an unfit mother because of bouts of rage and uncontrollable anger. He also tried to force her to be psychologically evaluated in order to continue the court proceedings. Both of them claimed that the other had threatened them with violence, with Darren trying to obtain a protection order against Charla, and Charla telling friends and family that she believed Darren was probably going to kill her. Charla reiterated her fears for safety at their final court hearing in May of 2006, when Darren brought up the fact that she had moved from their house but had not provided him with a new address, which he said violated their custody arrangement. Noting how out of hand things had gotten, it was at this final hearing in May that Judge Weller informed Darren and Charla that he was regretfully going to have to make a decision on their behalf, since it was clear that they could not come to a resolution themselves. On the issue of child custody, he kept most things the same, keeping the 1 week on, 1 week off system in place, and saying that Charla did have to provide Darren with an address. However, he stated that it was best if the exchange of their daughter was made with as little contact between them as possible, preferably with one parent remaining in their car. After that, he announced that he was making a decision mostly on the lines of the agreement from January. Darren would have 48 hours to pay Charla $480,000, and an account was set up so that the additional monthly payments of $10,000 could begin. Darren was also ordered to pay a further $15,500 to address the previously missed spousal support payments. Though neither side left happy, Darren in particular was livid. Still, no one predicted what would happen next. At around 9 a.m. on June 12, 2006, Charla showed up at Darren's condo to drop off their daughter, since it was a custody swap day. The girl quickly went inside and upstairs to the living room portion of the home, where she was greeted by Darren's lifelong friend and recent house guest, Dan Osborne. Osborne had apparently agreed to drive the Mack's daughter to her grandmother's house that day, because Darren said that he had some things to take care of. When Charla arrived, Osborne said that Darren went downstairs to the garage area of the condo to greet his daughter, but stayed behind once the girl was inside. A few minutes passed until he heard yelping sounds coming from outside. It sounded like they were coming from his dog. Osborne would later tell police that when he went to investigate and let the dog back inside, it was covered in what appeared to be blood. However, the dog did not seem to have any injuries. Before he could react any further, he said that Darren Mack came in through the garage door, brushing past him without a word. A towel was wrapped around his hand. Fearing that something terrible had happened, Osborne took Darren's daughter and left the house immediately, before calling police a short time later to share his concerns. However, by the time Osborne called 911, authorities were already struggling to deal with a different issue. Family court judge Chuck Weller had been shot in a suspected sniper attack while standing near the window of his third-floor office at the Reno Justice Court. In the mad scramble to track down the person responsible for the attack, officers on seemingly lower priority calls were diverted to the area around the shooting. This is exactly what happened to the officers who had been sent to check out the situation at Darren Mack's condominium. At the time, they believed the call was simply about a domestic disturbance, and no one had yet connected the two crimes. When officers finally did arrive at the residence almost half an hour after Osborne had placed his call, they received no answer at the door. They took a quick look around outside, but didn't see anything, and didn't investigate further because they didn't see Charla's vehicle on the driveway where Osborne had told them it would be. Meanwhile, in the city's downtown area, Reno police and SWAT teams were busy trying to secure the area. Of particular interest was a 13-story condominium construction project, as well as a 7-story nearby parking garage. Investigators determined that both of the structures would have offered the culprit a potentially clear shot at the courthouse. At the same time, roughly 200 employees inside the courts were forced to remain inside and away from the windows, while others were told to go into nearby shops and businesses. It wasn't until just after 2 p.m. that afternoon that investigators started to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The man that Dan Osborne had called them about that morning was the same person who had recently gone through a bitter divorce, one that had been presided over by Judge Weller. Miraculously, Judge Weller would survive his injuries and would go on to make a full recovery. He had been shot high up on the chest, and the bullet had not only missed his heart, but also major veins and arteries. Sadly, the same could not be said for Charla Mack. When investigators went back to Darren's condo that afternoon, they spotted a small amount of blood on the driveway that they had missed the first time. When they opened the garage door, they discovered Charla's body. She had died of vicious stab wounds to her throat and neck. Her vehicle had also been moved inside of the garage, explaining why police officers had not seen it on their first visit. A further search of Darren's house revealed the sheath to a knife believed to belong to the murder weapon, as well as a notepad with a list written on it. The list, which was written in Darren's handwriting, seemed to lay out in point form his plan for that day. One of the items on the list simply said, quote, "End problem." On the other side of the sheet of paper, Darren had allegedly written the word equipment, followed by a list of weapons and ammunition that included the caliber of bullet that had been used to shoot Judge Weller. As authorities continued to look for clues in the case, they soon discovered footage that they believed definitively linked Darren Mack to the shooting of the judge. It was a photo of the silver Ford Explorer he had rented a week prior, which had been captured driving into the same parking garage where they believed the shot had been fired from. Video that was captured in the garage reportedly showed the SUV backing into a parking space before the rear hatch opened, closed again after a short time, and then the vehicle drove away. The whole thing happened at the same time that the judge was shot, and tracking on Darren's cell phone showed that the device was also in this location at the time. Though investigators were now certain that they knew who they were looking for, and a federal warrant was issued for Darren's arrest, finding him proved to be much easier said than done. The one thing authorities knew for certain was that Darren Mack was on the move. Further tracking of Darren's cell phone showed that he had likely driven onto Interstate 80 after the shooting and had headed west. The trail lasted until just after Darren passed into California, when his phone pinged a tower near the Boreal ski area near Donner Summit. It's believed that this is about the time that he called a cousin of his in California, explaining to him that he wanted him to tell the media that he had done what he had done because of the injustices he felt he had suffered during his divorce proceedings. The final breadcrumb Darren had left for investigators came in the form of a credit card transaction at the Sacramento International Airport. He had swiped one of his corporate credit cards from the pawn shop business at a parking garage at the airport at about 2:30 p.m. that day. After that, his trail went cold. Though investigators didn't know it yet, Darren Mack had actually continued his journey in the rented Ford Explorer. His next stop had been the southern border, where he had crossed into Mexico before ditching his vehicle in the city of Ensenada and buying a bus ticket that took him all the way down the Baja Peninsula. It was here, in the resort city of San Jose del Cabo, that he seemed to slip back into the life that he was accustomed to, as if nothing had happened. He even checked in to the same luxury hotel that he had been to the year prior for a swingers convention, albeit under a fake name. Back in the US, the story of Darren Mack's horrific crimes were quickly capturing the attention of the public. The sordid details of the Mack's relationship was being sensationalized in news outlets across the country, with specific attention being paid to the fact that Darren was still at large. When Father's Day rolled around nearly a week later, the local newspaper, the Reno Gazette-Journal, which would go on to write hundreds of articles about the Mack case, ran a special Sunday cover story in which they dubbed Darren the Father's Day Fugitive. Luckily for investigators, even at a luxury resort hundreds of miles away from where he committed his crimes, Darren Mack wasn't able to avoid identification. A guest at the hotel where he was staying recognized him after a couple of days and called police. Though Darren had left the hotel by the time authorities arrived and fled to another resort he had previously stayed at in Puerto Vallarta, it seems that he soon came to terms with the fact that he couldn't stay on the run forever. It was at this point that he called Washoe County District Attorney Richard Gamick to negotiate his surrender. After a couple of failed attempts at working out a deal, Darren Mack surrendered to authorities, ending his 11 days on the run. He waived his right to fight extradition and was sent back to the U.S. to face trial. Perhaps predictably, once Darren Mack was returned back to Reno, the attempts at arranging his trial went about as smoothly as his divorce proceedings had. In fact, because the divorce had never actually been finalized, a lot of those issues were also still on the table. This included what money he was actually allowed to use to fund his legal defense, as Charla's family argued that the divorce settlement should still be upheld by the courts. The more pressing issue, however, was where the trial was actually going to be held. It turned out that because of his relationships and business ties to many people in the community, Darren actually knew a fair amount of the people in Washoe County who might be in charge of prosecuting his case. This included District Attorney Gamick, who Darren had reportedly known for years, and who, as previously mentioned, had helped to negotiate his surrender. After hiring a powerhouse legal team that included celebrity lawyer David Chesnoff, the defense's first order of business was to insist that Darren's trial be held outside of Washoe County because of conflicts of interest. They would ultimately get their wish, and the case was moved to Clark County instead. The same thing happened when civil cases were brought against Darren. Once again, these were moved outside of Washoe County. Though the defense tried to delay proceedings further, in part by arguing that there was insufficient evidence to try Darren for the shooting of Judge Weller, in November of 2006, he was ordered to go to trial for both crimes. When opening arguments were heard almost a year later, in October of 2007, the defense tried to put the blame for both crimes onto Charla Mack. Playing off of a variation of what Darren had claimed during their divorce, the defense argued that Charla had been abusive towards her husband and had terrorized him throughout their relationship. They further claimed that on the day that she had been killed, Darren had actually acted in self-defense. The story was that on the morning Charla had dropped off their daughter, she had started an argument with Darren about the divorce. Things had turned ugly, and she had tried to kill him with a gun, but it had misfired. The defense argued that Darren had feared for his life, and had responded by attacking her with the knife. Their explanation for the shooting of Judge Weller was that Darren had still been in a state of shock when he committed the crime, and that he was legally insane when it had occurred. The prosecution countered that Darren had been the aggressor in the relationship with his wife, and that the financial control he exerted over Charla was far more substantial proof of abuse than anything that the defense had. Prosecutors rejected the idea that Charla's killing was self-defense, or that Darren had been legally insane during the shooting of Judge Weller, because the note that they had found at the crime scene seemed to show evidence that both crimes had been pre-planned. There was also the fact that the defense had no evidence of the gun that Charla had supposedly tried to use to kill Darren first. Sensing the case was a lost cause, midway through the trial, Darren Mack and his lawyers reached a plea agreement with the prosecution. In exchange for prosecutors recommending a sentence of life in prison with parole after 20 years for the murder of his wife, Darren agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder, and also entered an Alford plea in the shooting of Judge Weller. For those unfamiliar with the term, an Alford plea is one in which the defendant technically pleads guilty but does not admit to a criminal act and asserts their innocence. It's basically a recognition that while the defendant is not saying they actually committed the crime, they realize that there was enough evidence for a conviction. Just when the case looked like it was over, it seems that Darren Mack couldn't help but try and throw one final wrench into the works. After entering his guilty pleas, he fired his lawyers, claiming that he was coerced into pleading guilty and that they had forged his signature during the proceedings. He now said that he wanted to withdraw both of his pleas. These motions were denied by the judge in the case, and in February of 2008, Darren Mack was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years for the murder of his wife Charla. For the shooting of Judge Weller, he was given the maximum sentence possible, 20 years with parole after 8, plus a duplicate sentence for a deadly weapons enhancement charge. All of his sentences were set to run consecutively, meaning that he would have to serve a minimum of 36 years in prison before being eligible for parole. During a statement at his sentencing hearing regarding Judge Weller, Darren said, quote, "I do understand right now in my state of mind that shooting at the judiciary is not a proper form of political redress." Though it's unclear what happened in all 9 of the civil cases that were filed against Darren Mack, what we do know is that the most high-profile one, the wrongful death suit in connection with Charla's murder, ended a month after his conviction. The jury in that case delivered a $590 million judgment against Darren, with $30 million ordered to go to Charla's estate and the remaining $560 million ordered to go to their daughter. While this is normally where we would have ended things, it's necessary to point out that in the years since his conviction, Darren Mack has continued to try and appeal his sentence, arguing that he was wronged by his lawyers during his trial. His appeals have failed numerous times, though it appears that he has continued to file motions as recently as the fall of 2020. In an interview with local media during his most recent appeal, Darren's son said that he believes that his father acted in self-defense and that he deserves another day in court. If nothing changes, Darren will reportedly be eligible for parole in 2042, when he is 82 years old. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.